This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
So today is Asara B'Teves. It's almost over, winding down. What happened on Asara B'Teves? So the Rambam brings down in Hilchos Tainus that today is the day that Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Yerushalayim and laid siege to Yerushalayim. This was really the beginning of the Churban. The Churban had a four-step process. They set siege, they surrounded Yerushalayim, and then on Shabbos B'Tammuz they broke the walls, and then on Tisha B'Av they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, and then the last embers, the last ray of hope was Gedaliah, and he was assassinated on Sam Gedaliah. I was always bothered by the following question. I even sent it to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and the question is based on Halach and the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says that why do we fast on Shabbos B'Tammuz? Shabbos B'Tammuz is the day that the walls were breached in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, if you look in the Navi says a completely different date. The Navi Yirmiyah says that the walls were breached on the 9th day of Tammuz. So, how do you reconcile that? Well, you reconcile it very simply. In the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, it was breached on the 9th day of Tammuz, and in the second Beis Hamikdash, it was breached on the 17th. So it happened twice. The first time it was on the 9th, and the second time on the 17th. So now the question is, so why do we fast the 17th? Why don't we fast the 9th? So the Shulchan Aruch says as follows. So Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Kuf Mem Tes of Beis. Shulchan Aruch says, Af agav dechsiv b'kra b'chodesh harvi b'tishel l'chodesh huvka. Even though it says that in the 4th month, on the 17th day of the month, the city was breached. Ein misanin b'tesva, we don't fast on the 9th. Ela b'yid zayin. Mimnei sha'afal pisha b'rishayin hufka b'tesva. Even though the first time it was breached on the 9th, kivan sheb'shniya hufka b'yid zayin. Since the second time it was breached on the 17th, basically you're only going to fast once. So tiknu lesanis b'yid zayin mishum dechurban b'ayisheni chomer lan. Because the second Beis Hamikdash is much more chomer than the first Beis Hamikdash. Why? First Beis Hamikdash was greater. Right, it says v'ikavda boy, the Navi Chagai, it says the word v'ikavda, missing a hey, and the Gemara in Yuma says that there were 5 things that existed in the first Beis Hamikdash that did not exist in the second Beis Hamikdash. What were they? You had the Eish min HaShamayim that did not exist in the second Beis Hamikdash, and you had the Arayin, which they didn't have in the second Beis Hamikdash, and you had the Urim v'Tumim, which you didn't have, and you had the Shechina. The Shechina was not present in Bayis Sheni. And you had Ruach HaKodesh that was not present during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. So Pashtus is that the period of the first Beis Hamikdash was greater than the second. If so, why do we specifically fast during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash? And the Shulchan Aruch says Churban Bayis is Sheni is Chamor. Presumably because that's what we're suffering from today. That being the case, I was always bothered by the following question. Asara B'Teves is the day that Yerushalayim was surrounded in the times of Bayis Rishon. Why in the world are we fasting on the day that they surrounded Yerushalayim, Bayis Rishon? We should fast the day they surrounded Yerushalayim, Bayis Sheni. After all, when it comes to the breaching of the walls, we fast on the 17th and not the 9th, because Churban Bayis Sheni, Chomer Lan. So why, when it comes to laying siege to Yerushalayim, do we fast when they laid siege by Bayis Rishon? Why don't we fast when they laid siege by Sheni? You ever think about that?
Don't we fast on this?
We fast.
Surrounding also, right?
No, we fast in May.
Yep.
What happens in May?
No.
Shavuos, Lag BaOmer.
No, when Romans surrounded.
That's the second Beis Hamikdash.
Right.
The Romans are the second. No, 1 second. The Romans, we fast when they breached the walls in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. But when did they surround the walls? In other words, you have the breaching. The breaching we go by Sheni and not by Bayis Rishon. We take the 17th and not the 9th. Why by the surrounding do we take the Asara B'Teves? Why don't we fast the day they surrounded by Bayis Sheni? So you'll ask, when did they surround it by Bayis Sheni? And the answer is I have no idea. But why doesn't anybody have an idea? Why do we have an idea when they breached the walls by Bayis Sheni? Why don't we know when they surrounded the walls in the times of Bayis Sheni? Okay, Simple answer, what I would suggest would be, the Gemara says in Gittin, that when the Romans came to set siege to Shalim in times of Bayis Sheni, the Gemara says we could have withstood them for decades. We had enough provisions, we had enough supplies in the city. The Gemara says they had enough wood, they had enough oil, they had enough wine, they had enough supplies. So what happened? In times of Bayis Sheni, basically what happened was some Bar Yonim came along and they burnt down the supply house. So really, the surrounding of the walls in the times of Yerushalayim wasn't tragic. Well, so what? They surrounded the walls. We could withstand it. What was tragic was that when they burned down the storehouses. So it could be that it wasn't really a tragic day when they surrounded Yerushalayim in the times of Bayis Sheni, only Bayis Rishon. But we're going to explore another possible answer. And I actually found this question in the Shas Tshuvas Tashbeitz, Chelek Beis, Siman Reish Ayin Aleph. Rav Shimon Duran was born in Spain in 1361. He's a descendant of the Ramban. And during the massacres of 1391, he fled to Algiers. Okay. In any event, he is bothered by this question. And it was interesting, the Tashbeitz argued on the Rambam. The Rambam held that if you're in a position of Klei Kodesh, Rebbe, Rav, Rosh Hashiva, Mechanech, you're not allowed to take money. That was the shita of the Rambam. The Tashbeitz was the first to argue on him, and he actually, personally, was the first to take a salary in Rabbanos. Thank goodness, right? So, but for better or for worse, I guess the reality is we pass on like the Tashbeitz, we hope. But the Tashbeitz asked this question, and that is, why do we not fast on the day that they surrounded the Yerushalayim in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash? Okay. Comes the Avudraham, and there's an astounding statement of the Avudraham, probably where many of us are familiar with. And the Avudraham makes the following statement. Avudraham is Rav David Avudraham of Seville, Spain. He says that the 4 Tanesim are usually pushed off when they fall out on Shabbos, except for Asara B'Teves. Firstly, he says Asara B'Teves cannot fall out on Shabbos. It could fall out on Friday. You know, I'm sure everyone has memories of, going into Shabbos fasting. The only time that's possible is Asara B'Teves. So you have Mincha early, and you lay in by Mincha, and then it's the whole thing. Okay. But then says Avudraham, even if Asara B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, we would not push it off to another day, because the Navi Yecheskel says about Asara B'Teves be'etzem hayom hazeh, and therefore even if Asara B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos. Now this is a very famous Avudraham. It's so famous that many people think that nobody argues on it. Rashi argues on it. Rashi on that Gemara, Rashi says explicitly, if you look at number 6, Rashi Masechta Megillah on Daf Hey Amud Aleph says, Imchal liyos b'Shabbos, if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, ma'achrin liyai machar, you would push it off to Sunday. V'chein Tisha B'Av, v'hu adin liyudzayin b'Tammuz, u'la'asar B'Teves. So Rashi says black and white, that if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you would push it off, like we would all assume. Because think about it, Shabbos is Dairaisa, and Asar B'Teves is only Midivrei Nevi'im. Like, why in the world would you fast on Shabbos? But the Avudraham says, he argues on Rashi, and the Avudraham says, if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos. Hafla of a fellow, what's he talking about? And in fact, the Beis Yosef asks, if you look at number 8, the Beis Yosef in Siman Taf Kuf Nun, the Beis Yosef says that the Avudraham says that if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you'd fast on Shabbos. V'lo yadati minayin lo yizeh. I don't know what birdie told him this report. Like, where did he get that from? That if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you'd fast on Shabbos. Why would that be? Why would that be? How could that be? Halachically, Shabbos is Dairaisa and Asar B'Teves is only Midivrei Nevi'im. So there's a very famous Chasam Sofer. I have to speak somewhere tonight, so I'm probably going to use this little Chasam Sofer, not the rest of this Shiur. But Chasam Sofer says a pshat, which is al derech drush. It can't really be what the Avudraham means, but the Chasam Sofer says like this. The Chasam Sofer, I believe, we have it on the sheet. It's in the number 22 in the Torah Moshe, Parshas Vayikra, in his drush for Zayin Adar. The Chasam Sofer says like this. It's mamish a go'inistic pshat. I'm not sure if this is what the Avudraham means, But this is the Chassam Sofer suggestion. Very beautiful. And that is, there are two types of Tanesim. There's a Tanis, Yom Shemes by Ava V'imai. A person could fast on the day their parent passed away. It's called a Yartzeit. And then a person could fast for a bad dream. And there's a very big difference between these two Tanesim. Because if a person has Yartzeit on Shabbos, they're not allowed to fast on Shabbos. Masha'in came for a bad dream. If someone has a bad dream, you're allowed to fast on Shabbos for a bad dream. What's the difference? Why are you not allowed to fast for a Yartzeit and you are allowed to fast for a bad dream? Says the Chassam Sofer, the difference is as follows. The difference is that if you fast for a Yartzeit, why does a person fast on a Yartzeit? They're crying over something that happened in the past. They're crying basically over spilled milk. So you're allowed to cry over spilled milk, but it has no tayalas. And therefore on Shabbos, you're not allowed to fast on a Yartzeit. Masha'in kain, if someone had a bad dream, the Gemara says in Tainis, Yafe Tainis l'chaloim la'esh b'no eras, that basically a fast burns down the ominous effects that a dream portends. So therefore, fasting for a bad dream actually has a benefit for the future. In other words, it's a constructive fast day as opposed to just fasting over what happened in the past. Says the Chassam Sofer, on Shabbos you're not allowed to fast for a past tragedy, so you can't fast on a Yartzeit. But you could fast for a bad dream because it has a toyelas for the future. Says the Chassam Sofer, mamish a davar nifla ma'od. And that is, there's a difference between Tisha B'Av, Shabbos B'Tammuz, and Asara B'Teves. Tisha B'Av, you're crying over spilled milk. You're crying over the Beis HaMikdash. So it's very nice. It's important. Sometimes you got to cry over the past. But you can't do it on Shabbos. And Shabbos B'Tammuz, we cry over the breaching of the walls of Yerushalayim. It's a very important thing to do. But you're crying over the past. You're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. But says the Chassam Sofer, Asara B'Teves is entirely different. Why? Because Asara B'Teves is the beginning of the process. It's when they surrounded Yerushalayim. That was the beginning of the downward spiral. And we know the Jewish calendar is a living calendar, which means that whatever transpired last year and the year before and the year before, it reoccurs every year, right? That's why Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchev says in Kedushas Levi, we say, Bayomim Ahem uvizman hazeh, that on Chanukah, it occurred back then on this day, so then those Oyros, Ramchal writes about this in Derech Hashem, those Oyros are reoccurring. It's a living calendar. It's a reoccurring calendar. Every year when you get to that date, those lights re-emanate. They come back again. And therefore, every year it's as if the Beis HaMikdash is burning again, like Chazal say, Kol Dar Shaloi Nivneh Beis HaMikdash B'Yamav Kilo Nechara B'Yamav. So really what that means is that Asara B'Teves every year is the beginning of the cycle of Churban. So says the Chassam Sofer, he's Megala Agiloi Nifla, that every Asar B'Teves, Rebbeinu Shalom convenes the Bezdin Shamayla, and is koiveya and decides, will there be Churban this year? Will there be a Tisha B'Av? Will there be a Shabbos B'Tammuz? Will that cycle reoccur this year, or are we going to put an end to the cycle? Once we're up to Shabbos B'Tammuz, it's already been decided. Once we're up to a Tisha B'Av, it's already been decided. So you can't fast on a Shabbos B'Tammuz that comes out on Shabbos. You can't fast on a Tisha B'Av that comes out on Shabbos because you're crying over the past. But on Asara B'Teves, you're crying, you're fasting to stop the cycle for the future. And you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're allowed to fast for the future on Shabbos. That's what the Avodah means, that if Asara B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos, because Asar B'Teves is different. Asar B'Teves, you're fasting for the future. But on a halachic level, that may not be what the Avodah means. He sounds like he's saying that the reason why, if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos, is because it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh in the Navi. Yeah, okay. So some understand that he's making a Gzeira Shava, because he says, it says in Yechezkel about Asar B'Teves Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh K'moi B'Yom HaKippurim, like on Yom Kippur. Now we know on Yom Kippur it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, and if Yom Kippur would fall out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos. So it sounds like he's saying, just like on Yom Kippur, if it fall out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos, and it says on Yom Kippur, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, so too on Asar B'Teves, it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, so you'd fast on Shabbos also. That would be very difficult, because the Avodraham was a great man. He was a Rishon. but he ain't no Amoira or Tana. And Rishonim cannot make up Gzeir Shabbos. The Rishonim cannot use any of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nidreshes Bahem to darshan new halachas. That, with the Chasimas HaTalmud, the 13 hermeneutic principles of exegesis, or in English, the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nidreshes Bahem, they're ended, they're closed. They're not available for us to use to derive halacha. So what's he saying? It says Etzem Hayom Hazeh on Yom Kippur, and it says Etzem Hayom Hazeh on Asara B'Teves. So over there you fast, and over here you fast on Shabbos. Well, what's he talking about? That's one question, and that's a question of the Beis Yosef. He says, I don't know what the man's talking about. Rashi makes sense. Rashi says if Asara B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, he'd push it off. But what does Avudraham mean? Comes the Minchas Chinuch, and he asks a beautiful question. Minchas Chinuch asks, wait a second. What's the halacha if Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos? Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, you push it off. Why do you push it off? Say, Shabbos is Dairaisa, and Tisha B'Av is only from the Nevi'im. Oh, wait a second, let's calm down for a second. Shabbos is Dairaisa? Yeah, Shabbos is Dairaisa, not doing Malacha on Shabbos is Dairaisa. But who says you got to eat on Shabbos? We know that if you have a bad dream, you don't have to eat on Shabbos. Who told you have to eat on Shabbos? It says in the Torah you have to eat on Shabbos? So some Rishonim say Taka eating 3 meals on Shabbos is Dairaisa. It says Hayoim, Hayoim, Hayoim. Most Rishonim don't say that. Who says you have to eat on Shabbos? It's Midivrei Nevi'im. Which Navi? The Navi Yeshaya. The Navi Yeshaya said, V'karasa l'Shabbos oineg. So it's not Dairaisa. It's only Midivrei Nevi'im. So now we have a big rivalry. We have a rivalry, AFC, NFC.
Isn't Kiddush Dairaisa?
Isn't Kiddush Dairaisa? Yes. Friday night Kiddush is Dairaisa. You know why? Because it says Zachar Siyam HaShabbos L'Kadshay. But nobody said I have to eat. And Kiddush is Dairaisa. Kiddush Al Hayayin is not Dairaisa necessarily. According to the Rambam, well, on Yom Kippur you don't have to make Kiddush. L'chayra, the Rambam says you're yotze b'dvarim, right? That's the shaila. If you say Kiddush, if you daven Shemona Esrei, so your Kiddush is only the Rabbanan now. Right? When you come home to make Kiddush, you already yotze Kiddush from Dairaisa. So your Chiv is only Midrabanan. Your wife has a Chiv Dairaisa, you might see your wife in Kiddush. So Ravadya says, tell your wife Good Shabbos, and then she'll say Good Shabbos, so she's yotze Dairaisa, and now you can make Kiddush for her. So you have to actually communicate with your wife, and right? And then you might see her. So when you get her to say Good Shabbos, so now she already fulfilled her biblical obligation. Right? There are a lot of answers to that question. But be it as it may, who says you have to eat on Shabbos? The Navi Yeshaya. Who says you should fast on Asara B'Teves? Zechariah, right? Navi Zechariah. Tzayim HaRavi, Tzayim HaChamishi, Tzayim HaShvi, Tzayim HaSiri. Yeh Leveis Yudos Sasson Z'Maydam Tovim. So 1 second. So let's bring them both into the room, because we have a big dilemma. What would happen if Tisha B'Av came out on Shabbos? The Navi Zechariah says fast. The Navi Yeshaya says eat. So what do? One Navi says eat, and one Navi says fast. What do you do when you have a contradiction between 2 Amoraim, 2 Tanoim, or even 2 Nevi'im? What do you do? So in halacha, whenever you don't know what to do, whenever you're at a stalemate, what do we say? Shev v'al tasa. You can't act. If one person says do and one person says don't do it, so I don't know what to do, I'm just going to be passive. So ask the Minchas Chinuch, every single fast that comes out on Shabbos, you should not eat. Why? Yeshaya says, V'karas Shabbos oineg, eat. Zechariah says, fast. We don't know what to do. We should not do anything. Not do anything means don't eat. So why is the halacha that Tisha B'Av is a nidcha and is pushed off to Sunday? Why is it pushed off? You have a conflict, you have a stalemate between the 2 Divrei Nevi'im, so what should we say? Shev al tasa. Therefore, ask the Minchas Chinuch, every tainus that comes out on Shabbos, you should fast. Another question. Remember we started off by saying Shivasa B'Tammuz is when they breached the walls in the second Beis HaMikdash. But in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, they breached the walls when? On the 9th. And why do we fast the 17th? Well, you're not going to fast twice, so we pick the one that's more relevant, the one that speaks to us, which is the 17th. Ask myself, what in the world are you talking about? There were prophets alive in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. They're Nevi'im. They legislated to fast on the 9th. So some later rabbis came along and said, well, we're suffering from the breaching of the walls on the 17th, we're going to switch it to the 17th. Chachamim, Rabbanim cannot argue on the Nevi'im. What happened there? How did Shabbos B'Tammuz move from the 9th to the 17th? Who did that? The early Nevi'im already legislated the 9th. So how did it change to the 17th? Another question. The Gemara says in Masechta Tainis Adav Chavtes about Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan got up in shul and he made the following statement. Tisha B'Av, it's a nice day, it's a good day. But if I were around, I would have made Tisha B'Av on the 10th. Why? Because most of the Heichal burnt down on the 10th. Because we know they set fire to the Heichal on the end of the day on the 9th, and it burned throughout the 10th. So Rabbi Yochanan says, just look at it logically. It burned down for 3 seconds on the 9th and 24 hours on the 10th. Why in the world are you making Tisha B'Av on the 9th? If I were around, I would have made Tisha B'Av on the 10th. And asked Minchas Chinuch, wait a second, Rabbi Yochanan, you're a great guy. Well, Rabbi Yochanan looked like Yaakov Avinu, he looked like Adam Arisha, and who's on the Kisei. Good, you're a good-looking guy also. But one thing is, who asked you? You're telling us if you were around, you would have made Tisha B'Av on the 10th. But guess what? It wasn't like some kind of rabbinic convocation that all the rabbis got together and they voted when to make Tisha B'Av. It's Zechariah. Zechariah told us what God said. So you, Rabbi Yochanan, said, if I were there, I would have made Tisha B'Av on the 10th. Rabbi Yochanan, you're a great rabbi, but we wouldn't have really cared what you would have said because Tisha B'Av was legislated by prophets who heard it from God when to fast. What do you mean if you were there, you would have made it on the 10th? Nobody would have asked you and nobody would have cared about your opinion. What did Rabbi Yochanan mean? Ilu hayisi asam, hayisi kaiveya be'asara. So therefore the Minchas Chinuch offers the following idea. A very important idea, a very Yesodistic idea. Some Rishonim agree, some disagree. And the idea is as follows, and it's important to know. And that is, when the Nevi'im made the fast days, they did not pick the day of the month. All they did was they picked the month. What's the proof? Look at the Navi Zechariah. Tzayim HaRavi, the fast of the 4th month, which is Tammuz. Tzayim HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month, which is Av. Tzayim HaShvi, the fast of the 7th month, which is Tzayim Gedalia. Tzayim HaSiri, that's today. They just picked the month. And they left it up to every individual to fast any day of the month that they would like to fast. They gave a certain discretion that as long as you fast during that month, your Yotzei came along the later Rabbanim and they legislated what day. You know what? They picked a month, but it's more reasonable to legislate. Let's have everybody fasting on the same day. I mean, what kind of time would it have? You come to shul, you can't even get a minion for Vayechal because every other guy is fasting a different day. There's no way you're getting everybody to fast the same day, right? So the Rabbanim came along and they legislated, you know what? You're fasting for the breaching of the walls. Let's fast on the day that it happened. You're fasting for the destruction of Beis HaMikdash. Let's fast on the day that it happened. We're fasting for... So Rabbi Yochanan says, if I were there, instead of... The Nevi'im didn't legislate the day. The Nevi'im legislated the month. The Rabbanan legislated the day. So if I was a rabbi in those times, I would have disagreed with them and I would have told them to legislate it on a different day. And yes, in the times of the month of Tammuz, so they legislated to fast during Tammuz. The day that was initially picked was the 9th, but that day was not legislated by the Navi, it was legislated by the Chachamim. So the later Chachamim had the authority to change the day as long as they're not arguing on the Nevi'im. So here is where the Chiddush comes in. Okay, hold on to your socks. I heard this from, there was an old a Talmud Chacham in Queens. His name was Reb Shlomo Warman. He authored many volumes, She'eris Yosef, 7 volumes, and then a number of volumes on the Yom Tovim. He was a Talmud Muvak of Reb Lezer Silver. He's also the Rosh Yeshiva of Hank for many years. He was a mamish goy nifla, like an old-time Baki. And he says this Chiddush, but later I found actually Reb Chaim says a very similar thing, just very clear logic. So again, let's go back to one of the questions of the Minchas Chinuch. Minchas Chinuch wanted to know, every single fast day that comes out on Shabbos, you should fast. Why? Because the Navi Yeshaya says, eat, v'karoso Shabbos oinek. And the Navi Zechariah says, fast, fast, fast. So what do you do when you have the head-on collision between the two Divrei Nevi'im? Sheval Tasa. You should just sit there and not do anything. And you should fast. Answers the Minchas Chinuch, you're making a mistake. There is no conflict when a fast day comes out on Shabbos. Why? Because Yeshaya says to eat, Zechariah doesn't say to fast. Zechariah just said to fast during that month. So fast Sunday. Zechariah didn't tell you to fast that day. He just told you to fast that month. So you don't have any conflicts. On such a fast, on such an occasion, we'll push off the fast. If Zechariah would have said fast on Shabbos, the Minchas Chinuch would be right. We don't know what to do, Shaval Tasa. But Zechariah didn't say to fast the day, he only said to fast the month. That's the Minchas Chinuch. So the Sefer Oiras HaShabbos, which is written by Rav Shlomo Warman, and then I believe Reb Chaim says the same thing in like one of the new printings, or maybe the old printings. He says like this: the Minchas Chinuch has a good answer for every tainus except for Asar B'Teves. Because Asar B'Teves, for all the other Tanesim, the Navi Yeshaya says eat on Shabbos, and the Navi Zechariah doesn't say to fast today. The Navi Zechariah said fast during the month, so I'll push it off to tomorrow. But there's only one fast day where the Navi didn't only pick the month, the Navi picked the day. That's Asar B'Teves, because Asar B'Teves it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. Oh, so when it comes to Asar B'Teves, you're back to the question of the Minchas Chinuch. The Navi Yeshaya says eat. The Navi Zechariah says, fast! No, but he only picked the month. He said the 10th month. So don't use the Navi Zechariah. Go to the Navi Yecheskel. And the Navi Yecheskel said, what? That's a Mayom Hazeh. So the Navi said, it has to be that day. So now what do? The Navi Yeshaya said, you got to eat on Shabbos. Yeah, but the Navi Yecheskel said that today I have to fast. So what do you do when there's a conflict between two Divrei Nevi'im? Minchas Chinuch says what you do. Shabbal Tasan, you got to fast. So that would be an explanation for what the Avodraha means. He doesn't mean, it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh here, and it says about Yom Kippur, so just like Yom Kippur, you got to fast on Shabbos, so you make a Gzeir Shava. There's no Gzeir Shavas. He's a Rishon, he's not making up Gzeir Shavas. He just means that just like Yom Kippur, the day of the month is legislated, so to Asar B'Teves, the day of the month is legislated. So, going back to our original question, why do we fast the day that they surrounded Yerushalayim in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash? Why don't we fast the day they surrounded Yerushalayim in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash? We said just like when it comes to the breaching of the walls, we fast when they breach the walls by Bayis Sheni and not Bayis Rishon. How about when they surrounded the walls? Why don't we say that let's fast the day they surrounded the walls by Bayis Sheni and not Bayis Rishon? In other words, if we're such a big fan of Bayis Sheni is more chomer, is more meaningful, then why is it only more meaningful by breaching the walls and not by the surrounding of the walls? So I think the reason is because by breaching the walls, you have flexibility. As long as you get that month, the month of Tammuz, then if in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash they did it on the 9th, the 2nd, the 17th, we can move it to the 17th. But when it comes to the surrounding of the walls, you don't have any flexibility. First of all, if it happened a different month, then you can't change the month because the Navi said the 10th month. And even if it did happen that month, if it happened on a different day, the Navi already said Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. There's no flexibility with Asar B'Teves. With Shabbos B'Tammuz, you have flexibility, so you can move it to the 17th. With Asara B'Teves, there is no flexibility, and therefore it could not be moved. Now it's interesting, I found an answer to this question of why we fast the day they surround the walls by bias Risha, not Sheni. The Shasachus Binyan Shlomo says we don't know what day it was. It was such a tragic period, we have no record. Interesting. We have a record of every other tragedy. The surrounding of the walls by bias Sheni, we have no record of.
You could also say that both Bach and Dash were really one Indian. So when you're talking about the beginning of the events, the Shiur of the destruction of the second base English happened in the breaking of the walls of the first base. When you're talking about the beginning of events, you're going to go based on the first base English, it's really one Indian of both. At the second base English, you're going to go by the later date, and that's why I said it's a harder date, because it's inclusive of also the first base English. If you're going only by the first base English, you wouldn't be doing anything on the second base English. So for the end, we choose the later date. For the beginning, we choose the earlier date, because it's really one Indian.
Right, I hear. I would like to know what that date is. What is the date that they surrounded? Right, so you're saying for the siege, we'll go by the beginning, because that's the beginning of the process, and by the end, we'll go by the closing date. So, and Rav Shlomo Kalman sent me a very nice Maramakam today, from Rav Yonason Eibeshitz of the Yaros Davash. He says that, the Chazal tell us, it's a medrash, that Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. So every day of tragedy also has, seeds of Yeshua, seeds of salvation. It's interesting. So when was Mashiach conceived? If he's born on Tisha B'Av, when was he conceived? So they say, he must have been conceived 9 months earlier. So Rav Yonason Eibeshitz says, no, Al Pi the Arizal maybe, that he was conceived limikutam for, a short and abridged pregnancy. So that would take you basically 7 months before Av, 7 months before Tisha B'Av. 7 months before the 9th day of Av is exactly the 10th day of Teves. So Mashiach was actually conceived on Asara B'Teves, which fits very well into this concept of the other Chassam Sofer, that Asara B'Teves is the beginning of the cycle. It's the beginning of the downward spiral, where every year Rebbeinu Shalom sort of revisits, is there going to be Churban this year? Or are we going to have Mashiach be conceived? That's the diyun. Is it going to be, should we create Churban or should we create Yeshua? It's interesting, there's another Chassam Sofer who says that on Shabbos B'Tammuz, Rus and Boaz had their relation and Oived was conceived. So really on all the Tanaisim, despite the fact they are Yemei Churban, they also have in them the seeds of the Yeshua. So we should taka b'zoicha that should be the beginning of the Gula of Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. We should be zoicha tzayim Aravi, tzayim Chamis, tzayim Shiur, tzayim Asiri, Yiyel, Lebeis Yehuda, L'sasoin, L'simcha, L'mayadim Toivim, V'ha'emes, V'ha'shalayim Ehavu. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.